Okay, so today we're going to go over some different types of vases that you possibly have been gifted or have in your cupboards at home, and maybe which vase choice would be more complementary to a floral bouquet or a bunch of fresh cuts that you bring home. So when you have a vase that maybe is a little bit shorter, it will work with a larger variety of flowers. And when you buy yourself flowers or take something maybe smaller, such as seasonal bunch of tulips. So this is a perfect example how a bunch of tulips often comes from a florist, is in a little bit of cellophane with an elastic band on the bottom. So I'm just going to take that guy off, and I'm going to clean up some of the ugly stems at the bottom. These don't mean anything. They don't mean that it's bad or it's old. That's just the way it goes. So sometimes things get a little bit marked up, and we're just going to pull those ones off. And then I'm going to take my tulips. I'm going to get them so they're all relatively at the same level. Sometimes this is a nice look too. It's nice and loose and natural. So you want to measure up so that the tulips are a nice, rule of thumb is about 1.5 times the top of the vase. However, because the tulips grow, this isn't really imperative. So I'm just going to, you can individually, or if you're comfortable with the knife, you're just going to take those stems off on an angle, hold the flowers up, plunk them in the vase, give them a little fluff. And there we go, we have our tulips. Vase like this, perhaps something taller and more upright on its own, would be Alstroemeria. Alstroemeria, chrysanthemums, spray mum daisies, carnations. So I'm going to hold it up. So I've got my vase. This is about 1 time the vase. This is about 1.5. And I'm going to cut either individually on an angle with a knife downwards, or if I'm comfortable with that knife, I'm just going to take them all off. And then I'm going to plunk them in the vase. Good, so it might not hurt to have a little bit more in here, but if you don't, this is fine. So then we have this nice large vase. A lot of times you're given a vase like this, you might have an ice bucket at home that you want to use, and something like hydrangea will look beautiful in here. So I have a nice wide opening. So in the past, the bouquets that I was building for you, that would also work in here, just cut down a little bit shorter. Going kind of with the theme of the single stems, 1 variety per vase, it's kind of a nice look as well. If it's available, you could add a little bit of greenery just to frame the outside. I'm a fan of tying the stems, that way they're going to stay in place, and if not, you can just skip this step. And then I'm just going to hold this up beside my vase. I don't want to hack this off here because I can't make it tall again. So I'm going to start here, and I'm going to err on the side of too tall rather than too short. And then I'm just putting this into the vase. Maybe I could go a little bit shorter so their heads rest on top. Or again, I'm just a fan of flowers. So this is also a beautiful look, just kind of laid off to the side. Everything is clean. Everything has a nice flow. And you could position this against a wall. This is beautiful in a kitchen. So another standard vase that you often will have in your cupboards, and just making sure that you've washed the vase out with a little bit of dish soap and vinegar, and you want to make sure to rinse it so that you're not having any residue bubbles or anything come in and contaminate your floral stems. Maybe drying it so that you don't slip when you're adding the flowers to it, and then filling it up with tap water, adding your floral food. I'm going to use hyacinth in this vase. So these are very, very beautiful. Their stems, again, as I mentioned before, they tend to bleed a little bit. So just being aware of that. Hyacinth is kind of one exception to the rule about putting greenery in the water. So these are really clean, and they're kind of similar to putting flower stems in the water. They're not going to make it any more murky than the actual flower will in this case. Plus they're really, really pretty. They're shiny, they're a nice texture, and they work with this flower. So I'm going to do it as sort of a miniature hand-tied bouquet, similar to what we did with the big, beautiful mixed variety. And I'm just going to do it with the 1 variety though, so it's going to be a little bit different of a look. Starting out with my hyacinth, and I'm going to take a little bit of greenery. Again, just sort of trusting that I know what looks good. Okay, so just adding some more of the hyacinth, a little bit of greenery. Good. And just finishing up with a little bit more of that greenery at the end. This guy we're not going to tie, so even though I've got that nice spirally flow, I'm going to lose a little bit of it, pardon me, but I'm also going to This vase is perfect. It maintains that, but it allows for the flowers to have their own natural flow. Hyacinth, along with most bulbs, tulips, daffodils, paperwhites, when they're cut, as they mature in the water, they grow up before they die. So these guys, tomorrow morning, they may be this big, beautiful, flowy, kind of different look than they are today. So that's kind of a fun as well. Vases are not the most important. Busier vases, so ceramic designed vases, often look better with something more simplistic, so one type of flower in one solid color. When it comes to glassware, you can kind of get away with anything. Shorter vases tend to let your flowers last longer because they don't have to work as hard to gather water. So taller vases, they make a bolder statement and they're good for events, they're good for larger functions, but unfortunately they won't hold up the flower life as well as something shorter. I hope that gives you a good idea of how you can use some of your vases.